The ledger was green. That is the thing I remember first. Green leather, cracked at the spine, the kind of book a man uses when he wants to look like a businessman and not what he is. The madam kept it behind the bar on a little wooden stand, like it was a Bible in a church. Maybe to her it was. She opened it the same way a preacher opens scripture, slow, deliberate, with the sense that whatever was inside was final and could not be argued. I watched her hands when she opened it. Fat fingers, 2 rings on the right hand, both silver, one with a red stone I could not name. She wetted her thumb before she turned each page. That is the thing that stayed with me, that small wet sound, the thumb on the page, in all that noise. The place was called Renner's. It sat on the American side of the border road, half sod house, half timber frame, and it smelled of pine pitch and grain alcohol and the particular sweetness of men who have not bathed in some weeks. There was a stove in the corner, throwing more smoke than heat. There were 8 or 9 men in the room, none of them looking at me, which meant all of them were looking at me. I had ridden 4 hours through snow to get there. My name, among the Oglala, was something that does not translate well. It meant something like the one who did not fall, which is a way of honoring a man without making it soft. Among the traders I was called Singh, which was half of my real name and easier for their mouths. My full name is Mongol Singh. Daku was what my mother called me when she was displeased with me, which was often, and. Somehow it followed me across 2 oceans and a continent and attached itself to my name the way burrs attach to wool. By the time I reached the Dakota Territory, I had stopped trying to correct anyone. I came from Punjab, which is a land of flat earth and wide sky, not so different from the plains in that way, though the similarities end there. I was 22 when I came to this country. I was, by the time of this story, somewhere close to 45. I had been a farm laborer in California, a railroad grader in Nevada, a mule skinner along the Bozeman Trail. I had spent 3 winters with the Oglala Lakota after I helped a war party retrieve horses that some white drovers had run off. A story for another time. I stayed because there was nowhere else I needed to be, and because the land asked nothing of me that I could not give. I had a place. A small ranch, if you want to call it that. 40 acres of bottom land along a creek that ran cold and clear even in July. A house that was mostly good, with 1 wall that still needed thinking about. 8 horses, 2 of which were mine by full right, and the rest held partnership with a Minneconjou man named Calf in the Road, who was the closest thing I had to a brother on this earth. Some cattle, enough. I was not a chief. Let me say that plainly. The title was shorthand, the way white newspapers write things to make a story simpler than it is. What I was, among the Oglala who knew me, was a man who had earned a particular kind of standing. Not through birth, not through politics, through the slow accumulation of doing what I said I would do, year after year, until they stopped waiting for me to do otherwise, is a different thing than being a chief. But it is also not nothing. Calf in the Road came to my house in the 2nd week of January. He came on foot, which meant the news was bad enough that he had not wanted to wait for his horse to be saddled. He stood in my doorway, and the snow was still falling off his blanket onto my floor. And he told me about the woman. He had heard it from a Minneconjou woman who had heard it from a half-breed trader who had been at Renner's the week before. There was a woman there. She had come from somewhere east. No one was entirely sure, and she had been sold to the madam by a man who said she owed him money for the passage. That brought her here. The madam had bought the debt. That was the term the half-breed trader used, and Calf in the Road repeated it to me in Lakota, which does not have an easy word for it. He translated it as she bought the woman's obligation, which is about as clear as it gets. The woman, by all accounts, had not agreed to any of this. But the madam's operation was 20 miles from the nearest settlement with any law in it, and the law that was there was the kind that cashes out when a man like Renner crosses its palm. So agreement, in this case, was not considered relevant. Calf in the Road told me this the way he told me most things, standing up, no particular ceremony, watching my face. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked him. He looked at me the way he always looked at me when I asked a foolish question. He did not answer. He pulled his blanket tighter and turned around and walked back out into the snow. I stood there with the cold air still coming in through the open door. My fire was going. I had a pot of something on. Beans, I think. A bone in them. The smell of it was good and ordinary. Outside, the snow was coming sideways. I went and found my good coat. I want to tell what I knew about the border trade. So you understand what I was riding into. Renner's was not the only place like it, but it was one of the meaner ones. A madam like the one who ran that establishment. I will call her Briggs, because that was the name on the ledger. A woman like that operated on a simple principle: debt. Everyone who came through her door owed her something. The girls owed her for their room and board. She set at whatever rate she needed to keep them from ever paying it off. The men who drank there owed her for the whiskey. The suppliers owed her for the distribution. And anyone who made the mistake of accepting any kind of help from her, in any currency, owed her for that too. It was a clean system if you stood on the outside of it and didn't think too hard about the people inside. I had seen it before. Different countries, different operators, same accounting. The railroad bosses had done something similar on the Chinese workers. Smaller wages than promised. Charges for lodging in tents they didn't choose. Charges for tools they were required to use. I had watched men who worked 6 days a week find themselves, at the end of a month, technically in the red. I understood the machinery of it. What I did not know, riding to Renner's that night, was the woman herself. The ride was cold enough to be its own kind of punishment. The horse I took was my gray, who was not the fastest, but who kept his feet in deep snow better than any animal I have owned before or since. His name was a Lakota word I will translate as steady, which tells you everything about him. We went at a walk most of the way, because walking was what the night asked for. I had with me 2 things of significance. The first was money. Gold coin, American, particular amount I calculated before leaving. The second was a knife in my right boot that I had been carrying for so long I had stopped, noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. I did not plan trouble. I planned to pay the debt. But I have learned in my life that planning and events are 2 separate rivers that do not always run parallel. I arrived at Renner's around 9 in the evening, by my estimation. The light was coming out from under the door, and from one window, orange and low. There were 3 horses tied outside, which meant at least that many men inside. I tied steady to the far end of the post, away from the others, and I went in. The room went quieter when I came through the door. Not silent. There was still a man at the back table muttering at his cards, and the stove was clicking and settling. But the particular quality of noise changed. I have been in enough rooms to know what that change means. It is not always hostile. Sometimes it is only curiosity. The same way a room goes quiet when anyone unusual enters. But it is something to track. X was behind the bar. She was a large woman, not fat but large, wide in the shoulders, thick in the hands, kind of build that comes from actual labor. Her hair was brown going to gray, pulled back. She was wearing a dress that was better than this room deserved. She looked at me the way she probably looked at most unusual things, with a flat, praising calm, like she was deciding what I cost. "You're a long way from your ranch," she said, so she knew who I was. That was interesting. "I am," I said. I took a place at the bar, not too close to the man already sitting there, and I set my hands flat on the wood. "I have some business. Men generally do when they ride 4 hours in the snow." She did not move toward the ledger yet. She was watching me. "Drink? Water," I said. She raised one eyebrow very slightly, poured it, and set the cup in front of me. She did not make anything out of it. I gave her credit for that. "I have heard," I said, "that you have a woman here who is working against a debt. A woman who came from the East." Briggs looked at me for a long moment. The room was still doing its quiet listening. I have several women here who work against debts, she said. It is the nature of the arrangement. This one came recently. Within the last month. She is not from here. Briggs considered this. She turned and reached for the green ledger. That wet sound of the thumb on the page, once, twice, 3 times. She found what she was looking for and turned the ledger so I could see it, though not so I could reach it. Elspeth Vogt, she said, German, came in from Council Bluffs in November. Passage paid by a man named Garvey, who sold me the debt at $140. She has worked off 12 of it. $128, I plus interest and board. 162, as of today. I had brought 180. I did not show that I was relieved. I will pay it, I said. Briggs looked at me. The man at the bar to my left had gone very still. The men at the back table had stopped pretending to play cards. You understand, Briggs said. This is not a transaction like buying a horse. I understand the nature of debt, I said. I am paying what she owes you. After that, she owes you nothing, and she is free to go wherever she chooses. She may not choose to go with you. That is her right, I said. She will have the choice. Briggs looked at me for a long moment. She had a particular kind of intelligence. This woman, the kind that survives by reading situations accurately and quickly. She was reading me now. I let her read. 162, she said again. I counted it out on the bar. American Gold, which speaks its own language in any establishment. She counted it herself. She turned and went through the door behind the bar. I waited. The man at the bar picked up his drink and moved to a table. I did not look at him. The fire in the stove ticked. One of the card players coughed. I had been waiting about 5 minutes when Briggs came back. She was alone. She won't come out, Briggs said. Not unkindly, which surprised me. There was something in her face I could not read entirely. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. She thinks it's a trick. I nodded. Tell her the ledger is closed. Her name is crossed out. Tell her she can see the ledger herself if she wants to. Briggs went back. I drank the water. It tasted of iron and something woody. The barrel it had sat in, probably. Outside, the wind had picked up. I could hear it against the boards. Another few minutes passed. Then Briggs came back, and this time someone was behind her. I want to be careful here about what I say and how I say it, because what I felt in that moment is the kind of thing that sounds large when you put it into words, and it was not large. It was quiet. It happened slowly, the way the dawn happens. Not all at once, but in degrees, each one barely different from the one before, until suddenly there is a different world. She was not what I had imagined. I had not imagined much, to be honest with you. I had imagined a situation, a problem with a practical solution. I had not been picturing a person. She was tall, or taller than average. Thins in the way of someone who has not been eating enough for some time. Her hair was dark blonde, pulled back in a way that suggested it had been done carelessly and not recently. She was wearing a dress that did not belong to her. You could see it in the fit, the way it pulled slightly at the shoulders, the hem a little too long. She stood in the doorway behind the bar, and she looked at me with the particular expression of a person who has learned to show nothing because anything they show will be used. Her eyes were the color of November water, gray-green, cold. I did not stand up or make any movement toward her. I had the sense that any quick movement would be the wrong kind. I had a horse once, a mare from a bad situation, and I'd learned with her that the first thing you do is nothing. You stand still and you let the animal take its time. The ledger is here, I said. I touched it without opening it. Your name is crossed through. What was owed is paid. She did not look at the ledger. She looked at me. Why, she said. The single word, flat, in an accent that came from somewhere I could not name, German gone to American, the rough consonants worn down but still there. Because it was wrong, I said. What was done to you, and because I had the money. You don't know me. No, I said, I don't. She was quiet for a moment. Briggs had moved back to the far end of the bar, and was doing something sewing with glasses, giving us the privacy of her disinterest. Where would I go? the woman said. It was not quite a question. That is your decision, I said. I have a horse and it is a cold night. If you want a ride somewhere, I can provide that. If you want to stay here, that is also your choice. Though the debt is gone and nothing she says can change that, I touched the ledger again. You may take this page with you if you want. Something shifted in her face, very slight, like a door that has been held shut for a long time and someone has taken their shoulder off it. The page, she said. Yes. She looked at Briggs, tore the page out herself, set it on the bar, went back to her glasses. Elspeth Vogt walked to the bar and picked up the page and folded it carefully into a square and put it in her pocket. She smoothed the pocket flat with one hand, twice, as though making sure it was still there. Then she looked at me. I need my coat, she said. My own coat, it is in the back. I will wait, I said. She was gone for 2 minutes. When she came back, she was wearing a coat that was hers. You could see it in the way she moved inside it, the ease of it, the way it knew her shoulders. Dark wool with 2 buttons missing at the collar. She walked to the door and opened it herself, and the cold came in. Well, she said. I left the water on the bar half drunk. I put on my hat and I followed her out. We rode back in something that wasn't quite silence. She was behind me on steady. Peace. Because there was no other horse, and there was no question of leaving her. She had been reluctant about this. I could feel the reluctance in the way she held herself, hands gripping the back of the saddle rather than my coat, making sure she touched as little of me as possible. I understood this. I would have done the same. I did not try to talk to her. The wind was wrong for talking anyway, coming hard from the northwest, heading across the trail and driving snow into our faces. Steady walked his steady walk. The dark was complete except for the snow itself. Gives off a kind of gray light even in the night, a dim brightness that comes from nowhere. About halfway back, she said, loud enough to carry over the wind. Your name. Singh, I said. Mangal Singh. A pause. Mangal, yes. She didn't say anything else for a while. Then, that is not a name from here. No, I said. It is not. Where from? Punjab, I said. In India. Another pause longer. I could feel her thinking about this, working it into whatever shape she needed it to be. I am from Bavaria, she said, originally. I have not been there. It is green, she said. Very green mountains, not like this. No, I agreed. The wind dropped for a moment and it was, very briefly, almost quiet. Just the snow and Steady's breath, and the creak of the saddle. Mangle, she said again. Quieter this time, like she was practicing the shape of it in her mouth. What does it mean? I thought about how to answer this. In Sanskrit, Mangal means auspicious, chunit, a good omen. The name you give a child you want the world to welcome. It means a kind of luck, I said. A good kind. She was quiet after that. But she moved her hands from the back of the saddle to my coat. I want to tell you about the next weeks because they matter. I did not assume she would stay. That has to be said. I did not ride back from Renner's with any plan that involved her staying. I had a second room in my house. It had been used for storage mostly, grain sacks, and a broken harness, and 3 years of things that had accumulated without intention. And I cleaned it out that night, some doing, and I made a bed from what I had. It was not a fine room, but it had 4 walls, and a door that latched, and a window facing east. She slept until nearly noon the next day. I heard her moving around sometime late in the morning, and I made coffee and put it on the table and went out to do the horses. When I came back in, she was sitting at the table with the coffee, and she had found the bread I had baked 2 days before. It was on the shelf, and she had cut herself a piece, and she was eating it with a focus that told me everything about the past several weeks of her life that she had not told me in words. I sat down across from her. I had a cup of coffee myself. I did not ask questions. After a while, she said, "You live here alone?" "Mostly," I said. "Mostly. A man named Calf in the road comes by. We have horses together." She nodded. She ate the last of the bread and sat with her hands around the cup. "I had a husband," she said. "He died in Iowa. There was a debt. His debt, not mine. But the man who came to collect did not distinguish. She said this flatly. The way you say something you have said, inside your own head many times, until it loses its horror and becomes just the shape of what happened. He said I could work it off. He had a connection with a man called Garvey. It went from there. I know, I said. She looked at me. Calf in the road told you. He told me the outline. She nodded again. She was quiet for a moment. The woman Briggs. She was not the worst. This seemed like a complicated thing for her to say, and she said it carefully. There are worse. I want you to understand. I was not going to stay there. I was going to leave. I was working out how. I believe you, I said. She looked at me for a moment. You do? Yes. Most people, she said. When they hear the name of a place like that, they decide they know what you are. Most people, I said, are not thinking about you when they decide that. They are thinking about themselves. She looked at me a long time after that. I got up and refilled the coffee and put more wood on the fire. When I sat back down, she was still looking at me with that November water color in her eyes, that gray-green that was cold and still, and, there was something in it now that was different from the night before. The night before it had been a locked door. Now it was a door that was still closed but had no particular lock on it. I will stay for a while, she said, until the spring maybe, if that is acceptable. It is acceptable, I said. I can work, she said, in a tone that made clear this was not negotiable. I will not be kept. The east wall of this house needs finishing, I said. And I hate to cook. If either of those suits you. Something that was not quite a smile crossed her face. Both, she said. Winter is long in the Dakota Territory. It is a fact that people who have not lived through it do not understand in their bodies, only in their minds. You can know intellectually that a winter is long, but you cannot know what it does to you. The way the days shorten until there is barely light at all. The way the cold has texture and weight. The way you learn the sound of every board in your house because you have heard them all so many times, in the nights that you cannot sleep. You learn the particular personality of the cold. The way it comes dry and sharp in January, wet and heavy in February, treacherous and deceitful in March, when it pretends to be spring and then isn't. What you also learn, if you are lucky, is what you are made of, and what the person beside you is made of. She finished the east wall in 10 days. This is not a small thing. Had been putting it off for 2 years because the work was tedious and the angles were strange, and I always had something more urgent to do. She looked at it once, asked me where I kept the tools, and went to work. She had done this before. She told me her father had been a builder in Bavaria, and she had worked beside him as a girl. Hands knew what they were doing. I would come in from the horses and find she had solved 3 problems I had been puzzling over for months. We did not talk excessively. This suited us both, I think. We talked when there was something to say. We ate together at the table. Sometimes in the evenings she read. I had some books, not many, and she read them the way someone reads who has been a long time without books, is to say thoroughly and without hurrying. Sometimes I would be sharpening tools or mending something, and she would read aloud a passage that struck her without explanation, and I would listen, and sometimes I would say something about it, and sometimes I wouldn't, and either way was fine. In the second week of February, Calf in the Road came by. He came on horseback this time, which meant it was not an emergency, just a visit. He came in and drank coffee and looked at Elspeth Vogt with the particular expression he used when he was making up his mind about someone. She looked back at him with the same even regard. They did not share a language in common exactly, but they shared something else. The quality of people who do not perform for strangers, who wait and watch and decide in their own time. He said something to me in Lakota, on his way out, that I will not translate in full. The gist of it was that she had good eyes, and that I should not be stupid. I told him I was working on it. He laughed, which was a thing he did rarely, and it was good to hear. There was a night in February, the coldest night of that winter, as it turned out, 30 below or near enough that it didn't matter, when one of the horses got into trouble. The gray, steady. He had been fine in the afternoon, and I found him in the evening, with his legs locked and his eyes wrong, the kind of colic that can go either way in a cold night. I was in the barn with him for 6 hours. It is a long story and not a romantic one. It involves a lot of walking the horse in circles in a space barely large enough for it, and a lot of watching, and the particular focused silence of someone who is trying to hold an animal together, through will and attention. Elspeth came out at midnight with a lantern and a blanket, not the horse's blanket, mine, and she did not ask if I needed help or offer remedies. She held the lantern steady, and walked on the other side of steady when I walked him, and when I stopped she stood where she was and let me think. Around 3 in the morning, the worst of it broke. The horse's legs unlocked, his eyes cleared, he put his head down and ate some hay, and I sat down on the floor of the stall, with my back against the boards and my legs straight out. And I was too tired in the way that lives below thought, in the joints and the base of the skull. Elspeth sat down beside me. The lantern was between us, burning low. Outside the wind was enormous. You could hear it working against the roof, trying the eaves. But the barn was its own country, smelling of horses and hay, and the particular warm animal dark that is one of the better smells in the world. We sat there for a while. Then she said, "He's going to be fine." "Yes," I said, "he's a good horse. The best I've had," I said. She was quiet for a moment. See her breath in the lamplight. "My husband," she said, "was not a bad man. He was a weak man. There is a difference. But it did not help me much in Iowa." I did not say anything. The man who came for the debt, Garvey, he had known my husband was weak. He had been waiting for him to fail. There are men like that. They wait for the crack, and then they put a wedge in it. "Yes," I said. "I have met them." I kept thinking, she said, that I should have seen it coming, that I should have known. You cannot always see the crack in a man until the weight goes on. "No," I said, "you can't." She picked up a piece of straw from the floor and turned it in her fingers. "You don't have any cracks," she said. It was not quite a statement, and not quite a question. I thought about this. A man who tells you he has no cracks is either lying or hasn't met enough weight. "I have cracks," I said. "I've had some weight on them. And I'm still here," I said. She turned the straw in her fingers one more time, and then let it fall. She leaned her head back against the boards of the stall, the way I had mine. We were not touching. There was 6 inches of space between us, maybe 8. But the space felt different than it had an hour ago. "Mangle," she said. "Yes, thank you. For the debt. I want to say it plainly, because I haven't, not properly." "You don't owe me anything for it," I said. "I know," she said, "is why I can thank you for it." I looked at the horse. He was standing easy now, one hip dropped, the way horses stand, when they have decided everything is all right. The lantern made his coat look like burnished wood. "You said until the spring thaw," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I know what I said. Has the calculation changed?" "Maybe," she said, and I could hear something in that word. Not a door opening, but the sound of someone considering the door, measuring it, deciding. I did not push. I have learned in my life that the things worth waiting for are worth the waiting, and the things that are rushed into are generally the things you have to undo later. "We should go in," I said. "The horse is fine now. We'll check him in the morning." "Yes," she said. We got up. I took the lantern. She took the blanket she'd brought for me and folded it over her arm. We walked through the cold from the barn to the house, and the snow was so cold it didn't crunch anymore, just compacted silently under our feet. The sky was absolutely clear, and the stars were the kind you only see when the air has no moisture in it at all. Hard and particular, each one its own point, the whole sky turned to iron and diamonds. She stopped at the door and looked up. "My God," she said very quietly, not to me, to herself, or to the sky. I looked up with her. I had lived under this sky for years, and it still had the capacity to do this to me, to take the breath for a moment and replace it with something that had no word. We stood there for maybe a minute. The cold was enormous. It didn't matter. Then she opened the door and we went in. Spring came the way it always does in the territory. Not cleanly, not once, but in arguments. A warm week in March. Then a foot of snow in April. Then 3 days of rain that turned everything to mud. Then a hard freeze that turned the mud to a kind of corrugated iron. Then finally, in the second week of May, a morning when you woke up and the air had changed, and you could smell the earth under the snow, and the creek came up fast with meltwater, and ran loud enough to hear from the house. She had been here 4 months. She hadn't said anything more about leaving, and I hadn't asked. There is a particular kind of domestic quiet that settles into a house when two people have decided, without saying it aloud, that they are staying. You can feel it in the way they move around each other, in the comfortable distribution of tasks, in the absence of the particular tension that comes when a person is deciding whether to go. But there was a thing between us that was also unspoken in the other direction. Something that had been growing since the barn, since February, slow and careful, the way things grow in cold climates, which is to say without much display, its energy into the root rather than the flower. I am not a man who has been easy with this kind of thing. I want to say that honestly. I had lived alone for a long time. I had learned to not want what I could not have, and there were things I had wanted and lost early enough that the wanting had become a private thing, held close, not shown. There was a woman, years before, in Nevada, a long time ago, and it had not gone the way I'd hoped. After that I had kept my own company, mostly, not out of bitterness, out of a kind of economy, the conservation of a thing that, if expended, could not easily be replaced. What Elspeth did, without appearing to intend it, was change the accounting. It was a Saturday in May afternoon, when Calf in the Road came a guy in with 2 of the horses we'd been running together, and word that he'd found a buyer for them. This was good news. They were good horses and the price he'd negotiated was fair. We drank coffee and went over the figures and worked out the division, and at some point Elspeth, who had been in the garden cutting back the dead stalks from last year, came inside and washed her hands at the basin and sat down with us. She and Calf in the Road had developed, over the winter, a way of communicating that was mostly gesture and expression, and the occasional word that had crossed between the languages. It was not efficient exactly, but it was honest, which is better. He showed her the figures on the paper, the price per horse, the division, and she nodded and pointed to a number and made an expression that asked, clearly, whether it was enough. He made a gesture that said it was good. She made a gesture that said good. Then, he said something to me in Lakota. I laughed. She looked between us. What? He said, you have the face of a woman who knows the value of a horse. She considered this. Is that a compliment? Among the Lakota, I said, it is not a small one. She looked at Calf in the Road and said, in German, something I was fairly sure was a thank you. He nodded once, seriously, which among him was the equivalent of a smile. After he left, I was in the barn checking the remaining horses when Elspeth came in. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then came to stand by the stall where I was working. Mangle, she said. Yes, I want to say something. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. The afternoon light was coming through the gap at the top of the barn wall, the way it does in May when the sun is getting higher, and it fell across her face and made her look like someone in an old painting. Not a grand one, not a church painting, but the kind a Dutch artist makes of an ordinary woman in ordinary light who turns out to be something to see. She said, I have been trying to decide whether to say this for some weeks. I know, I said. You know. I have been waiting, I said. She looked at me for a moment with those gray-green eyes, and then something in her face settled. Not softened exactly. She was not a soft woman, and I would not have wanted her to be, but settled. Like a house after the last beam goes in, when the whole structure finds its final level. I am not going in the spring, she said. Good, I said. I am not going because I have nowhere else to go. I want to be clear about that. I have somewhere else I could go. I could go to my cousin in Pennsylvania. I have thought about it. I know you have, I said. I am not going because she stopped. Started again. When I came here, I had stopped, expecting anything. Good. Shh. I had learned how to want very little, because wanting things led to being hurt when they were taken. So it was simpler to want nothing. She was speaking carefully, measuring each word. What you are, the kind of man you are, is something I had stopped believing existed. Not kind in the way of a man who is gentle. Kind in the way of a man who sees a wrong and has the capability to correct it, and simply does, without debt, without account. I did not say anything. I would like to stay, she said, if you would have me. Not in exchange for anything, as myself. I looked at her for a moment. There was the smell of hay and horses, and the May afternoon, coming in through the gap in the boards. Somewhere outside a meadowlark was doing what meadowlarks do in May, going absolutely berserk with the simple fact of warm weather. Yes, I said. She took 2 steps forward and she took hold of my hand. My right hand, with both of hers. And she held it the way you hold something you are going to keep. Her hands were strong. There were 2 small cuts on her left palm from the garden work, almost healed. I could feel the calluses from 4 months of hard work, were her own, which she had made herself. I turned my hand and held hers back. Shit. We stood in the barn in the May light, and the meadowlark kept on with its lunatic song, and Steady put his head over the stall door and pushed it against my shoulder, which is a thing horses do when they want your attention, or possibly when they want to be part of what is happening. Put my other hand on his nose, and he blew out through his nostrils in the satisfied way he had. We stayed like that for a while. I am an old man, now. Older than I thought I would be in the honest way, which is to say, I did not expect to see this as age when I was younger, and now that I am here, I find I do not mind it. My joints have their opinions about the weather, and my eyes need help for reading, and the gray in my hair has been complete for long enough that I forgotten what the other color looked like. Elspeth, she goes by Ellie now, has since the 2nd year, though she still uses the full name when she is irritated with me, which is a reliable signal. Ellie is older too, in the way that people who live real lives get older, which is with the grain, the weathering that is not damage, but the record of a life actually lived in. We have this house. It is not the same house. We added to it twice, and after the fire in '84, we rebuilt the east end, and by now it is more new than old, though the foundation is the original. We have horses. Not as many as once. Calf in the road is gone these 12 years. And the partnership went with him, and I have not had the heart to run so many animals without him. 3 good horses, currently. Steady's blood is in one of them, a gray with the same flat feet and the same imperturbable character. We have children, 2 living. Shh. I will not say more about that except that they are good people, which is the most a parent can ask for, and also more than most parents deserve. The page from Briggs's ledger, the folded square that Ellie put in her pocket that night at Renner's. She kept it. I asked her once, years later, why. She thought about it. Because it was mine, she said. The debt was not mine, but the page was. The proof that I was free. She looked at me, and because of the man who paid it. I wanted to keep the evidence of that kind of man. That is the thing. That is the thing I come back to. When I am sitting in the evenings, and the light is going, and the old house is settling around me. Not the ride through the snow, not the counting of coins on a bar, not any of the large events of it. That page. What she said about it. The evidence of that kind of man. I have spent my life trying to be that. A man who sees clearly and acts accordingly. Who does what is necessary without ledger keeping, who holds his obligations, who does not ask for return on what is simply right. I came from a land 10,000 miles away, and I crossed 3 oceans of circumstance to arrive at 40 acres of bottomland on a cold water creek. And the test the land put to me, the final test, was whether I was the kind of man who would ride 4 hours in a January blizzard for a woman I had. Never met because someone had done her wrong. I was that man. I am glad I was. She is in the next room. I can hear her moving. She has been reorganizing the shelves, which she does periodically, and which involves a certain amount of strong opinion about where things should go and a certain amount of things being dropped or moved with force. In a minute, she will call me in to lift something, or to reach something, or to agree that the old arrangement was foolish. I will go. Outside it is evening, the creek is running high, spring again. Another one, the water cold and loud over the stones. The sky to the west is doing what this sky does. The colors that have no names, the ones that last for 20 minutes and then are gone. The meadowlark is still out there, somewhere in the grass, still at it. Still absolutely certain after all this time that something worth singing about is happening. It is.